Hey, everybody. Donnie Turner here from the Tampa Bay podcast. So today we're going on with our Nuts and Bolts series, just speaking to investors, from investors, by investors. We're operators, property managers, but we've also been in your shoes. And, we always thought it would be valuable for new-time investors or even for investors that need, a reminder to go over some of these fundamentals. So in the past, we've talked about rent collections. We've talked about a few topics, but today we want to talk a little bit about marketing and leasing. So, you've got your property, you've remodeled it, you're basically halfway there. Now you got to rent it. So let's talk a little bit about that. So how do we know when a property is ready to rent?
That's a good question, Donnie. Yeah. A lot of times, people do a visual inspection of a property. You might just call that a walkthrough, and everything looks good. It's clean, everything's in the right place where it needs to be. Nothing's out of place. There's no clutter or anything. You might say, oh, yeah, this is ready for somebody to move in. But in reality, what I think needs to happen in order for a property to be rent ready for sure is to do what I call a test drive. Turn on the AC. Run all the faucets, flush all the toilets, turn the oven and the stove on, check the refrigerator, see if the ice maker's working, open and close all the doors, all the nuts and bolts kind of functionality stuff that will immediately be discovered by a tenant when they move in, but you won't be able to see just by walking through the house as to whether or not this stuff is working correctly. You got to actually test drive it. And so that's what we recommend to our property managers and leasing agents in the field is to, check out the actual working operation of the property. You don't just do a once-over visualization of what's there.
That's right. And that walkthrough is, that's the pretty pictures, right? Is it going to look good in marketing? And can you go through and take pictures of everything and it looks shiny and clean? That is a certain level of readiness, and you need that level of readiness for your marketing to be excellent. But what Chase is talking about is a whole different reality. I mean, I could tell you how many times we've had renters move into properties and they live there for a week. But the problem is that, over the course of the prior month, the property sat vacant and contractors used the toilet and didn't flush it and used too much toilet paper, and it sat and clogged up the pipes. So that once the tenant lived in it for a little bit and flushed a lot, well, the plumbing backs up, right? And so that's the test drive that Chase is talking about. You might not even be able to fully test drive a house with just a run-of-the-mill examination of the features. Sometimes it's only the tenant who can discover some of those problems. So get used to that reality. But those are the two levels of readiness that we like to represent at HomeProp.
Sure, yeah. Right. You won't be able to do things like run a full load of clothes through the washer and dryer, run your dishes through the dishwasher, unless you want to stay there for a couple hours. But yeah, definitely no substitute for living in the property. But definitely we can do what we can in a 30-minute test drive.
Right.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So you've diagnosed your property at least to the full extent that you can at the time without actually living in it. So I guess the next step, and we spoke about this before in previous podcasts, but it's worth mentioning today because it's so important, is selecting the rent rate, right? So how much can I get out of this property that I own?
Right. So, yeah, there's lots of different ways to evaluate that. And as the investor, some of those real well yourself. You've used Rent-A-Meter and you've seen what Rent-A-Meter recommends that your home rents for. And you've gone to Zillow and you've looked at the rent Zestimate and you've seen what that is. And there's two great data points. If you're a real estate agent or you've got a realtor buddy, or you can just go to realtor.com, you can look at what homes represent their rent price for in those venues, in actual realtor brokered venues. Realtors don't always list all kinds of properties for rent. So if your sweet spot is Class C duplexes, you might not find a whole lot of comparable rental data in MLS for that kind of product. Frankly, you're not going to find a whole lot of that kind of product on Zillow or Opendoor either. For that kind of product, you might need to drive around the neighborhood that you live in and see what people are scrawling on their for rent signs, right? They've got a big red for rent sign and they've got like $650 a month for this 2-1 or whatever it is they're asking. And that's a good way to see what people are what competitors are asking for their homes in your neighborhood. So lots of different ways to try and comp out or get a comparable value of rent for your home. And you're just going to want to look at those factors and the market trajectory to set your price. And so what I mean by market trajectory is, are you in a market right now where rent prices are going up? And that, if you are, then you're not going to want to price your home at or below, certainly, what your neighbors are pricing their rental for. You're going to want to price it a little bit up because you're in a strong market where rent prices are moving up. But if they're moving down, on the other hand, or flat, you might need to price your rental property at or below slightly what your competitors are pricing their homes at in order to rent your home. So lots of different mindsets you need to have, lots of different hats you need to wear when you're looking at pricing your property.
Yeah, and probably one of the main things to consider is just that you're pricing apples to apples when you're looking at comps. Make sure that the amenities you're offering are similar to the ones that you're comping your property against. Make sure it's a similar type location. If you've got a home in an HOA community, comp it against other HOA communities, things like that. So those are just some best practices that we may have already mentioned on a previous pod that go into figuring out what that right rent rate is, because setting the rent rate is critical to minimizing your vacancy. You don't want to set it so high that you get a lot of door kickers, a lot of showings, but nobody actually signs a lease. And you don't want to set it so low that you leave money on the table. And that's really the science, or, I guess maybe the art behind setting the appropriate rent rate.
Yeah, and one major advantage of hiring a professional property manager, listing agent, right? Because they can help you find that sweet spot. In my experience, some owner operators, they think they know what they got, and then their listing is on the market for 60 days, and they've missed 2 months of rent, or they've just been comping their rent rates just by themselves. They're like, oh, well, last year it rented for $650, so I guess I'll rent it for $700 when the rest of the market's at $1,200, right?
Right.
So
yeah, what a tragic loss that is. So many people, especially if you bought your home a few years ago, you're feeling really good about, $50 or so a year rent rate increase. You feel like you're really moving in the right direction. Your pro forma contemplated maybe even a little less than that. And so you're feeling like you're banking, but the market's left you behind, right? You could be charging way more, right? And you don't know it, or you haven't correctly evaluated that. So you're leaving tons of money on the table, and you're really hurting yourself, because when you go to renew rents after the first 12-month period, you will have been asking too much to begin with. And now how do you renew to market rate if you were already substantially below market? It puts you in a very tough spot. You want to make sure your rental property is marked to market. And the markets assume that people will be efficient in their contemplation of rent prices. If you're not efficient, you create real problems for yourself primarily and for the whole market. So make sure you are efficient and you have appropriate price points.
Yeah. So, okay, quick word about leasing. So moving on to marketing. I mean, Peter, you mentioned, hanging up the for rent sign in the window of your home, or right there in the front lawn. I mean, so once upon a time, that was the only way to do it, right? And it worked really well. And, there's still some owner operators out there that are probably still doing that.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Professional, property managers like ourselves, right? We've a little bit more sophisticated, using the full power and scalability of the internet to market our property and to let everyone be known that it's there, right? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the history of this is really remarkable, because it's not that long ago that people were like sticking up. The more scrappy and uncorporate you could look, the better, right? So get a totally unbranded white sign and a big Sharpie marker and draw all over that thing, because people who rent your house don't really want to rent from a corporation, right? They want to rent from a guy, right? An investor. They want that kind of like homey feel. They feel like a corporation is going to charge too much for app fees or have too high qualifying standards. And so that's the way this whole market was done. If you're still that investor, that market has moved way away from you now. Now, rentals, even of Class C, lower income rentals, the whole market expects a higher level of professionalism. So the renters are expecting to be thoroughly vetted and screened. They're expecting to pay a market priced application fee, which in our market is $70 a head, right? So, and that's irrespective of rent price, right? So you're paying a lot of money, even at a low end property, for an application fee, right? They're expecting to rent from a corporate landlord. Corporate landlords are everywhere. They're in Class C's as much as they're in Class A's. So they don't care if you've got a corporate for rent sign in front of the home or not. A prospect is still going to call you. So keep in mind that is what everyone has learned to expect. And if you're not charging appropriately for application fees, for example, you're leaving money on the table and you're exposing yourself to tenants that haven't been correctly screened. So that's a risk. But there's a whole lot of times we don't even put signs up on properties because people don't browse for properties the way they used to. They're not driving around in their car as much and like going through the neighborhood and wanting to live right there. Instead, they're jumping on Zillow or apartments.com or homes.com or realtor.com, and they're looking for their home there. So you want to make sure your online presence is bang up and awesome, and that people can go in there and see your beautiful pictures. They can schedule their showings online because they don't want to have to wait for you an hour or 2 hours or till tomorrow to drive to the property and show them the property. They want to be able to get into that property now. So you better have some kind of self-showing software that you use, hardware at the house and software to schedule those appointments, or you better have on-site people to immediately let people see their homes, right? That whole process is going to be done online and is going to require a far shorter lead time than it used to. So those are just some of the things that have changed in recent years and that you should be doing if you're an investor in this market.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I guess going back to signage and talking about the pros and cons of that. The one ancillary benefit you can get by sticking a sign in the yard, if you're even allowed to do that in the neighborhood that you're advertising in, is that over the years we have had several owners, if not a dozen or so, come to us seeing that we're marketing properties in their neighborhood, and they may be self-managing, and they're like, "Hey, I'm looking for a manager. I see your for rent signs everywhere. I'm going to call you and let you manage my property too. You seem to get these things rented pretty quickly." So if you're a property management company or looking to get going in that realm, sometimes putting the sign up is free advertising, right? And it's free advertising inside of a neighborhood that you probably wouldn't be able to advertise in that way with any other kind of opportunity like that outside of having a home that you're leasing. So consider that because that could be something that turns out to be profitable for you in adding new units.
Yeah, almost like a listing agent putting a for sold, just sold sign, right? It's letting people know that you're a mover and shaker in the market and you know what you're doing. That's great. Yep. Well, I really like that we mentioned Zillow. I mean, I think the impact that it had on the industry is kind of hard to describe, right? Because we went from signage and now we have this online marketplace. And I mean, it's basically the online shopping effect. It's like the Amazon effect. When me and my then fiance at the time, we were looking at houses that we wanted to go on. I mean, you dream build a little bit. You pull up the Zillow app and you're like, oh, wow, look at these Class A apartments and look at the amenities. Wow, this is so beautiful. Or, you look at a Class A home in Wesley Chapel and you're like, oh, wow, look at the square feet. It got a pool. It got all this and that. And that's how people are shopping for property these days, whether it's renting or buying. And so I think, there is plenty of advantage of putting signage up, but you as a property manager, you as an investor, you need to have a very good and strong, powerful presence on Zillow as a platform. And that, number one, just like Instagram, right, that all the millennials and Gen Zers are using, and Gen Xers, it's very visual based. People look at your online Zillow listing, and if they don't see, usually professional photography or at least well lit photos, they're going to scroll right past it and they're going to go to the
That's
next.
right. Photography is the most important thing. Like you said, I mean, you're scrolling through looking at photos, right? You're not reading the description until you're attracted by the photo.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, very important that you've got good pictures up there. And even to go back one step, because there's a pro and a con to photos, right? You can dress a property up with really slick looking photos. And then when you go there in person, the place doesn't look anything like the way it's being represented visually online, right? Yeah. And that's not good, because you're going to get a lot of people coming to see your property, but all they're doing is leaving dirty footprints in your house that have to be cleaned up, because they're never going to rent it if it doesn't look in some way or is represented in a realistic way in the photos. So yeah, I mean, photos are great to show off the best sides of the property. You want them to look good, you want them to look clean, but you also need to have your property actually look and feel like the photos when people go there in person, and marry those two things up for your potential prospects that are going to apply for rent.
No, 100%. I mean, you don't want to catfish your prospects, right? They show up and they're like, what is this shack? This thing was a 6,000 square foot mansion. But
yeah.
Well, can we dive a little bit deeper into that? Can we talk a little bit about, so, I'm a property manager, or I'm an operator, and I do want to take good photos. So can we go into the mechanics of that? How do I take good photos of my property?
Yeah, that's not an easy skill. And there are services that do professional photographs, and they're affordable. And so if you're looking to really promote your home, go ahead and invest in professional photographs from a pro photo company. And maybe if you've got a really high end home, you want to do some aerial shots there too, because I don't know what it is. You can go on Google Satellite all you want and Street View, and you can see this thing, but it looks different when you see a cool satellite shot, or a cool drone shot, or even better yet, that twilight picture. I don't know, a sunset on a house. I mean, it's just beautiful. It makes you feel like, yes, this is the one I want, right? And it's just a sunset in the background. So these are really important things if you've got a higher end product and you want to make it look beautiful. And you can do it kind of once, right? Because those pictures will last for 5 years, right? Even if your furnishings and fixtures are different. If you're a do-it-yourself, oh, by the way, you're going to spend, starting at $150 to get good pro photography. But there's online services and they'll schedule them really quick. So it's easy. Just spend the extra $150 and get that photography. But if you're going to do it yourself, make sure you're using your wide angle photo vantage point on your phone, right? So go ahead and expand that so you can really see that full spectrum of the room, and make sure the lights are on and the windows are open, and make sure that your carpets have nice and clean lines on them, right? That they look freshly vacuumed. Try to notice the pro photos. I mean, they're often highlighting someone's furnishings and because they're staged furnishings, right? Or someone's countertop decorations because they look really snazzy. And it's like, that's not going to be in the house when you go rent it, but someone's trying to buy a lifestyle, right? And trying to buy design and, feeling and comfort. And so you want to try and reflect that as much as possible in a home. But what you don't want is like someone's stuff, right? And so like it's your stuff and it's a bed and they've kind of like pulled the blankets over and there's a pillow up there, and it might be someone still in the bed just covered with a blanket. You don't really know, right? Because it's, as much as the bed is made, who knows, right? And you look at it and this is like cluttered and it's not, the colors don't coordinate. There's no headboard. Things just don't look like the lifestyle I'm aspiring to. And every renter at all class of homes is aspirational. So give them something they can aspire to. If the furnishings in your home are dingy, it's better to advertise it without any furnishings at all than it is with dingy furnishings. And so either make sure you've got a wonderfully staged home with beautiful furnishings and nicely decorated walls, or a blank palette so people can imagine their own stuff. But you can do that yourself. Modern phones have got great features. And so you can do that on your own phone. If you want to upgrade and get a nice camera and a nice wide angle lens, you can do that too, but it's not always necessary. I highly recommend pro photography. It makes such a difference.
Yeah, and if you're going to invest in pro photography, or if you're even going to do it yourself, there's some things on the exterior of the house that I think make a big difference in how people perceive the property. And so if the house needs to be pressure washed or painted, don't spend money on pro photos until that's done. And maybe the owner's not ready to spend that money right now because it's not going to look good. If the roof is very old at the end of its life and the shingles are curling or it's extremely discolored, pro photos are just going to make that look exactly like it does, really bad. Okay. And your photos will too, for that matter, but you won't have spent the $150. The other thing, the driveway and the sidewalk, having those pressure washed, if you're going to invest in the pro photos, and I highly recommend it on these higher end properties, spend the money to pressure wash the driveway, soft wash the roof, pressure wash the house, maybe even paint the house if it's needed, because you spend the $150 and invest in these pro photos and you can use them for years and years if this stuff looks good when you take the pictures. So just all kinds of things to consider. Obviously, it all costs money, but at the end of the day, especially if you've got a high-end property, it can make a 10 or 15% difference in the rent price you get for that property because you've done things like pressure wash and soft wash and paint and things like that. So I would keep that in mind and try and develop the right plan for presenting your property online.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like I said before, and I love that we went over the aspirational bit of it and just the public presence of it on the internet. In realty, right, we talk about curbside appeal, and that's become virtual. Now we have virtual curbside appeal, and people look at the listings and they look at the kitchen, right, and they want to see the granite countertop and the steel appliances, and they're like, oh yeah, I can see myself, frying eggs and bacon right there. It'll be great. And so you're selling your listing before they even walk on the property these days. So incredibly important. So so we talked about that. We talked about taking the photos. Let's talk a little bit more about distributing those photos. So, how do we exactly manage our marketing schemes when we're putting our properties on the market?
Well, this is going to be an area where a pro property manager is going to be the most useful to you, right? Because as an individual investor, you can go ahead and upload these photos onto Zillow. You can list your own property for rent on Zillow. The Zillow group has a syndication network that it sends properties out to. It's good. It's thorough. It reaches a portion of the population, right? But a pro property manager is going to put these homes and put your home for rent in just a complete set of advertising sites, right? So anywhere that people are looking for a rental home, that pro property manager is going to make sure your home is advertised. And that really does make a difference. Well, the majority of renters are looking first at Zillow and apartments.com. If you go to Unique Home, if you've got a home that's a higher asking price, you definitely want to be where everyone is looking, not just where majority of people are looking. And so your property manager should have a syndication platform, and they'll put your property for rent and the pictures and the description and all your qualifying terms, and they'll blast it out to the market. And they'll make it so that whenever someone's looking for a home like yours, they will find it. And it won't just be the pictures, right? They'll be able to click on that listing. They'll be able to schedule a showing. Guys, I spoke of this earlier. This is so important, especially post-COVID. You need to be able to offer immediate gratification to a prospect who's looking to see your home. And back in the day, when people had to schedule something 2 or 3 days out from now, it's just not the way people are now. People want to be able to see your home right now because they've got a gap in their schedule this afternoon, and they want to be able to go and look at the house. And they don't want you there. They really don't. They want you as the owner there. They don't want you as the property manager there. They want to be able to walk freely and independently through that home. They want to be able to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. They want to kick the tires. I promise you, they don't want to steal the fridge. They've got nowhere to put the fridge, right? They're in a Kia Soul, right? Where are they going to stick that thing? So they're going to want to look at the house. And since they've used self-showing technology, your property manager will have protections. They'll have a copy of the ID, probably a copy of the credit card of the browser. They'll have talked to them to ensure they have clear access instructions. They might even talk to the prospect while they're walking through the house, but certainly after they've left, they'll call again to make sure the key is back where it was supposed to be. And that is a wonderful free experience for the prospect. They want that kind of freedom when they're browsing your home. And the right syndication platforms integrate these self-showing services. So all this works together seamlessly. It gives people it lets people shop how they want to shop for homes. And this is what you need to offer people as an investor these days.
No, yeah, perfect. I like, yeah, people want the privacy, right? And yeah, they want to be able to talk trash about your property without having the listing agent hovering over them. They're like, what do you mean the color's not nice? But yeah.
Well, exactly.
One thing to watch
your
out
house isn't
for.
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing to watch out for is I think we're all familiar at this point with rental scams. And, a lot of times people will ghost your listings online. They'll use Craigslist. They'll create additional, listings on all kinds of online platforms. And so you may have that prospect that has experienced something like that, thought they had rented a home. Maybe they dealt with a scammer and they couldn't tell. And so from time to time, you are going to have those people that they're not going to trust the electronic, disconnected, non-personal process. You've got some elderly people that may have challenges with technology. So depending on the kind of property you've got and who your target renter is, it's appropriate to tailor the process to those people. But be aware of scams. They're out there. There's really, there's a few things that you can do to try and prevent that from happening to your listing, like watermarking photos and doing some other things of that nature, staying on top of your listings and reviewing them on all online platforms pretty regularly, just by doing address searches and things like that. But all this online process is fantastic. The technology and the innovation over the last 10 years is wonderful for property managers, leasing agents, and renters alike. But just beware, there are bad actors out there, and they will come after you if you have a significant presence online, or if they think that what they see in your listing is easy for them to take advantage of.
Right. I think the best method that we've had, these technologies are always evolving, more fail safes to help prevent against these bad actors or these rental fraud scams. But one of the things you can do the best is put up a sign in the property. So on the door, looking out at the renters when they show up to the door, on the kitchen counter, put up a sign that says, this home is professionally managed by you or owned by you. And that if you're not being accompanied right now, or if you haven't scheduled an appointment with a HomeProp agent or with your name as the investor owner, then you're probably a victim of fraud, right? And that way, when someone shows up at a property and something doesn't look right, familiar to them, they're seeing a sign that shows a different company's name, they're going to have another bell go off in their mind. By the way, they already have lots of bells going off because these fraud scams are all contingent on the fact that someone is able to market your home for rent at some so cheap price that someone's going to find it on Craigslist and say, wow, this is too good to be true. But they're naive enough to not resist the call of their instincts to say it probably is too good to be true. And so they submit an application and they try to actually rent that home for this really low price from this fraudster. So there's lots of red flags already going off. The sign in your sign in the property can be that final red flag to prevent fraud from actually happening to that poor person, right? And so it's also going to be a mess for you if it does happen. But that's one of the surefirest ways that we've had of preventing it.
Yeah, we also use, electronic code boxes, which, they do track, who goes into the property. They've got to register on the platform to get a code and to get access in that way. And, we've had some fraud with that too, with fake IDs and things like that. However, it is another layer that really helps protect the property from bad actors like that.
Oh, yeah. Great points. Okay. So let's see here. We got the listing, we marketed it. We had a lot of prospects. They came through, they looked at the listing, they showed themselves in, they walked the property, they love it, they want to rent it. So how do we proceed from there? What's the next step?
All right. So this is where we're going to actually have received the application through our system, right? In most cases, they will have They've loved it. They're going to tell you they want to apply, and they will commence applying almost without telling you if you're an investor these days or a property manager. And so your system will start lighting up with new prospect inquiries. And you'll see that they've submitted their identification, that they will have submitted their application, which will include their employment information and their social security number and their car and the number of applicants. And you'll see all this information start cascading into your system. If you're doing this without a good property management system, you're creating so much work for yourself, because a good property manager, a good system, allows the tenant to feed all this information to you, and then that comes right into your system. So that when you have a thorough application, you can go ahead and press screen, right? Screen the applicant. And then your applicant will be screened through all the credit reporting bureaus, all the background check bureaus, the criminal record databases, the court record databases, and just about everything else to help you understand what kind of a person you're renting to. That screening process is so important. If you're an investor, you cannot skip it. If you've got a friend applying for the home, you cannot give them a pass. That friend needs to go through the same application process as that total stranger, simply because you don't know everything about your friends. There could be something in their background or in the background of a co-applicant that you really need to know about, right? And so you need to upfront let them know that you are required by your lender, by your property manager, by your wife, whoever it is who's your accountability partner, to screen every applicant. So go ahead and submit the fee and go ahead and be screened. And hey, you can prioritize your friend's application, right? You can make it come in before anyone else's if you want, but you should really screen everybody. The information that you can now get is wonderful. It's thorough. It's so comprehensive. And you can make a great decision on your new applicants based upon the information that you get.
Yeah, one of the key things to screening, because the technology is great, you can run people's information through the software and get all of this information about who they are, what they've done. But the one thing you can't do, usually in an automatic way or through a software screening process, is document their income. And this is one of the most important things of screening, is documenting that this person actually has the job they say they have, and that they actually make the kind of money they say they make. Online, when they fill out an online app, they can say whatever they want, but now it's your job as the leasing agent to document and verify what they're telling you. And so getting a verification of employment directly from their employer is a critical step in the process to make sure they actually have a job. And then you got to document what that job is paying them. And you can do that through pay stubs. You can do that through their tax return if they're self-employed, or you can do it through bank statements if they have a company they own where a good portion of their business is a cash business and they're not reporting it to the IRS. This does happen. It does present an additional layer of risk in documenting exactly what their true income is. And so the most stable forms of income verification are pay stubs, where the applicant receives a W-2 from their employer, or verifying through their tax returns what their AGI is that they're reporting to the government. And when we do tax returns, we usually want to see a pattern. So we collect 2 years of tax returns. If they have a W-2 job and we're looking at pay stubs, we usually get between 3 and 4 months of pay stubs to verify income. But verifying that is critically important, because it's the only way they can pay your rent. If they don't have income, they can't pay rent. And so that's one of the biggest qualifying factors and one of the most important pieces of the approval and screening process.
Yeah, you're not being too hard asking for this stuff, Donnie. Everyone at all income levels are used to providing this. They have it. Mm-hmm. If they don't have it, they're not a good credit risk. So you don't want to rent to them. But they do have it. It's ready to go. It's another thing, like when you're going through that process, if someone's like missing a piece of it, they don't have it ready, this is just a really good sign to you that person might not be a responsible renter. They might not have the documentation they need. They might be manufacturing the documentation you need. They can't quickly provide this sort of stuff to you. Then these are all red flags that go off in your mind that say this is a higher credit risk than what you want to take. But if everything falls into line, you have someone that you can give a thumbs up to. Now, do keep in mind, landlords, you must clearly communicate to your renters what your qualifying criteria is. So you must communicate clearly what their income needs to look like, right? Income to rent ratio, generally. Clearly communicate what their background needs to look like, what their, what things, what kind of other lifestyle patterns that might affect their application. If those are things that you won't accept in that home, you need to make sure that's clearly understood before that renter applies. That's called your qualifying criteria. And if you don't provide qualifying criteria, you run afoul of fair housing, right? And fair housing is something you do not want to run afoul of. The fines are outrageous. They can shut you down. There are criminal penalties that can accompany it. So you want to make sure you do not violate fair housing requirements and that you make your home readily available to all who fall within a clearly advertised and published standard for applications. As long as you do that, you can accept and deny someone within that objective standard of acceptance, right? Or denial, right? You can also contingently approve someone. Let's say they have an eviction in their past, and so you're stating that there's no evictions for a certain period of time. But within but they have an eviction that falls at the very tail end of that. You can do a conditional approval, or you can do a rejection, but ask for an additional amount of security deposit to compensate for some factor in that qualifying criteria that they might have violated. So those are contingent approvals, but you must be careful in contingent approvals, once again, that you're consistent in how you apply them, that you make no exceptions for one class of person or another, or one color of person or another, because those are all things that will run afoul dramatically of fair housing.
Yeah, compliance is key in the process. And so if you have a good screening software, it will make those recommendations to you so they're less subjective. It will recommend to you what the contingency should be, additional security deposit. Well, how much? 2 times, 1.5, whatever that might be. And it will prompt you to communicate what they call an adverse action letter to any prospect that you're going to deny. And that's also a federal requirement and something that, is very costly if you don't comply with that process. And so we're talking about, the Fair Credit Act, we're talking about fair housing, and those are federal issues. And anytime federal is in front of compliance, it means if you don't comply, you will pay a big fine. And there's very little leniency there. In fact, in recent years, it's like they're looking for excuses to come after landlords and property managers, especially when it comes to potential discrimination in these matters. And so just make sure you have a good process in place. Make sure you dot all your I's and cross all your T's, because you don't want to get caught up in an investigation for one of those matters.
Yeah, and that adverse action letter. So that just details to the prospect why exactly they were denied. Is that right?
Yeah, it just gives them a statement or two about the qualifying criteria that they did not meet. And so it'll be usually bullet points of, your credit score wasn't high enough, or your debt to income ratio is too high, or your rent to income ratio is too low. And so it'll detail for the person exactly, what qualifying criteria. And that's the key thing, is you have to identify qualifying criteria that they did not meet in order to be accepted.
Sure. Yeah. And we're not being dramatic at all. I mean, these are real requirements. If you are a landlord, if you're an operator, you can't just ghost your potential prospects. You need to do all of these requirements. And, we keep plugging ourselves in this episode, but because it's so important, you need to be professional, and you need to do everything that you need to do. Everything needs to be above board. So
Donnie, on that front, one thing that's changed recently with some new legislation and guidance from fair housing is the treatment of criminal activities. And so, 10 years ago, we could deny any felon for any reason. If you had any felonies, you're denied, no problem. And I still run into people today that have that same policy. But guidance has come down, and even some laws have been changed that prohibit you from doing that. You've got to have specific guidelines for things like felonies or even misdemeanors if you're going to deny for those as well. And what we've found is things like minor drug offenses that are felonies are no longer considered something that you can deny someone over. If that's the only thing they run afoul of, you've got to consider other things. You've got to consider a contingency in that matter. And so staying up to date on these kinds of rules changes and guidance that comes down from fair housing is really important. You as an individual probably don't have time for that, but us as property managers and leasing agents, it's our business to be on top of those things. So again, it's all about making sure you're not running afoul of the law and that you're complying with all of these federally mandated, clauses that come down and legislation that's presented in our industry.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like, the legality, it's getting a little blurred more and more by the day is what it sounds like. I mean, so you're navigating a minefield. And if you navigate it yourself without a guide, right? I mean, you could find yourself in deep trouble. So
that's right.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Okay. So moving along the process now. So now let's just say, we got a beautiful property. We got it marketed, somebody, your first prospect went through and they're like, wow, I love it. I want to sign the lease today. So you have them, you screen them and, they're beautiful. They make all the money. They got everything. So now what do we do now?
Well, it's a matter of getting all the paperwork done and the money in and, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, right? So you certainly want to send the lease over to the renter. They've seen the property. You want to send the lease over so they can have a chance now to review that lease. And that lease should clearly indicate all the terms and conditions of renting from you and all the obligations clearly outlined that renter is going to have. One of the things that we add to our lease document, which we think is so important, is almost a summary page that outlines the tenant responsibilities of living in this home, along with the owner responsibilities. Because lots of tenants don't realize that they're not living in a hotel and that they have an obligation to do some things at that property too. Being a renter is not a maintenance-free experience, right? You still have to change your own light bulbs. You still have to change your air conditioning filters. You got to mow a lawn in a lot of cases. You might be responsible for pressure washing the driveways and the sidewalks and the side of the house and cutting minor landscaping off your house if it's growing onto your house. And so your tenant needs to know all of these obligations that are theirs, right? They actually have to own a lawnmower or pruners, or they hire someone to do all of that, right? So making sure the tenant understands that obligation clearly will save you from a host of problems that you'll have once that tenant becomes yours, living in your property. So you're going to orient them and describe the lease document to them. You're going to give them some expectations for funds that you need to have in your bank accounts before that lease actually gets signed. That's a security deposit, usually equal to the first month's rent. It's last month's rent. It's the full amount of last month's rent, and it's first month's rent. So just think about it this way. It could be as much as 3 times first month's rent that you need to get from that applicant in order for you to have the consideration or the funds you expect to have to execute that lease. Once all those funds are cleared in your bank account, then you can sign that lease with that renter, right? So it's critically important because a check is not enough. If you take that check to the bank and cash it and 3 days later it bounces, I hope you don't have a signed lease at that point because you don't have funds to back up that signed lease. And now the tenant has a lease and can move into your property without having paid anything, right? So make sure those funds are cleared in your bank account. A rush tenant is a big red flag, right? Hopefully they've planned their life a little better than needing to have that property today, right? If they haven't, then they must have cashier's funds, certified funds, some form of actual hard funds that they can give you so that you can know that you can take those funds and they will clear your bank account with 100% certainty before you give them that lease.
Yeah, just to clarify a little bit on that process our software allows us to use this fantastic feature called rent money. Because what we found out over the years is there's hardly any such thing as guaranteed funds except for a wire transfer and cash. Almost every other form of payment can be recalled or withdrawn back from your bank account for any reason we found. I mean, really, sometimes these reasons are ludicrous, but the best way we have found with our particular software to collect these funds is through this rent money process where the prospect takes cash or other form of payment that will be accepted by Western Union, Amscot, Walmart, 7-Eleven, gives that institution the funds. And through this rent money process, that money is then guaranteed to us as the property manager and goes right onto their ledger as if they made an electronic guaranteed payment. So there's some things like that you can do to make sure that you truly are getting guaranteed funds. You really don't want your leasing agents out there collecting bundles of cash, but 7-Eleven is glad to collect a bundle of cash. So is Western Union or any other location like that that works with this rent money concept that we use. So that's one important thing. And one other thing I'd like to highlight is that the tenant can sign the lease, because a lot of times the tenant wants to at least see the lease, if not sign the lease themselves before they fork over money. But what Peter was talking about with the execution of it is you as the leasing agent or property manager countersigning that lease to fully execute it. So having a signed lease from a tenant or a prospect is fine. They can sign all day long. Doesn't matter how many times they sign or initial that lease, it means nothing until it's fully executed by the property manager or the leasing agent. So you can work out what steps, or what process works best for you in a step-by-step. But just remember, as was pointed out, do not execute the lease until you have the guaranteed funds. It's critically important, because if you do, you've now legally granted access to that property to someone who hasn't paid you a dime. And now you've got to evict them, which can take time and money if they choose not to cooperate with you for whatever reason.
Yeah, 100%. Good thoughts. Thank you. So
then, the next thing you're going to want to do is orient them, right? A lot of times property managers feel like, hey, like, I've got the money, I've got the lease, I can just move the tenant in by giving them a lockbox code. They move their stuff in, everything's good, no problem. Well, that can happen, and it happens all the time. But I think we would suggest that is not a best practice. You as the leasing agent need to meet this tenant at some point face-to-face. And it's a great idea for you to meet them at the property during this move-in and give them an orientation. And there's so many things to orient the tenant to, not only the nuances of the property, like how to change the air filters, what to do to triage minor maintenance issues, show them that, garage door that sticks a little bit, show them where the upside down outlets are that are only turned on by a switch, all that kind of stuff that's kind of a nuance to that property. But you really want to orient them to your process as a property manager. You want to tell them how to log into their online resident portal. You want to tell them how to submit maintenance requests in writing, how to pay their rent, how to set up their bank accounts for automatic ACH, how to do all these things, and then add on the layers of like HOA and their rules and regulations, and how to access pools and other amenities, and where they find the mailbox, and what key works for that, how the garage door remotes work, and all of that stuff is critical during this orientation process with the tenant. Because the better you do at orienting the tenant to the property and your process, the fewer headaches you're going to have down the road, and probably the less maintenance requests you're going to get immediately after move-in, which is going to not only save you headaches, but save owners money and having to dispatch people to the property.
yeah, sounds good. So yeah, that sounds like it covers it. So we talked about marketing our property. We talked about listing it. We talked about putting on the photos on Zillow and other syndicate sites, screening our tenants, our prospects, leasing them, and then finally the big day for the tenants, big day for the landlord, the move-in, and exchanging the keys and making sure they're fully onboarded and everything else. And there you have it. Now you have a leased property. Congratulations.
That's right. A leased property to a happy renter where expectations are clearly understood. And that makes everyone happy, right? Because even in an imperfect scenario, if everyone understands what their role is and what things are, then people are generally more content. So that's what this process is all about. making sure that at every step of the way, people are clearly communicated with, they understand their expectations, how their actions lead to positive outcomes, and ultimately the most positive outcome, you start getting cash flow from your rental property. Congratulations. You're now officially an investor.
You're a real estate investor. You're a kingpin, a tycoon. No. So I thought it was interesting. Just another quick word. The importance of meeting your tenant, shaking their hand, and seeing their smiling face, and vice versa. I wonder if there will ever be a point, and if it's not too far away from now, where this entire process is completely remote.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
I mean, I would think, just preliminary thought, that a tenant, I would want to meet my landlord. I want to know who I'm paying rent to. At least, who am I going to be dealing with? Who do I actually submit the maintenance request to? Because if it's just some faceless, nameless corporation, something in the ether, like think about, we were talking about the fraud with the listings and everything else. I mean, how do I know if I'm actually leasing the correct property from the correct person? How do I know I'm not going to be approached a month from now by somebody else? They're like, hey, you're not supposed to be living here. I don't know. But
It's a tough question. On the single family sector, it's tough, right? Multifamily, you never really officially meet your landlord, right? I mean, because
true.
Blackstone or whoever, but you meet their representative, you meet someone in their office, right? People will, over the course of time, become comfortable with different digital interactions, digital meetups. They have already. COVID was a huge motivator, probably cut 5 years off of that adoption life cycle. And now we're all very good with in-person showings and online technologies for signings. We don't really need to meet up with people. We can do meetings this way. And we're all very happy with it. And so maybe there comes a point where we can easily do a video conference from our office with our official property manager shirts on, and everyone's 100% comfortable about that, right? We're not far from there. And I think some tenants could do that right now, and it would be fine. And some tenants, you could walk around their home with them on their own video phone, on their own phone with a Zoom link, and you could orient them to their home digitally from your desktop. That's not impossible, but they've got to be able to work their phone, right? So that's the contingency. But we're not far. Soon it will happen.
Yeah, listing agents, showing listings in their boxers. They're like, hey,
it's already happening.
You can definitely do all that stuff, and again, I think it's just being cognizant of who your client is. Some people like that, some people don't. And the more you can make that tenant comfortable, I think the better your relationship with the tenant is going to be, because that's what you've begun, is a relationship with this tenant. And it's going to be fine until something happens. And then, will they give you the benefit of the doubt as the property manager? Will they, have a connection to you in some way? Hopefully that's the case. And they won't just view you as this greedy landlord that's trying to stick it to them as a tenant,
That's
but one tip out there for those of you looking to rent, if you want to be sure that the person you're paying rent to is actually the owner of the property, at least on our leases, one best practice we use is on the lease, you will find the owner of the property on the lease as the landlord. We're the landlord's representative, but your lease is between you and the owner of the property. It's not between you and HomeProp. HomeProp's just the manager. And so you can go on the county property appraiser's website, enter the property address, and see who's listed as the official owner of the property, and make sure that matches up with the name on the lease that you signed. And that's one step. And then the second step might be to ask your property manager for some kind of proof that they have an agreement with the owner for you to manage that property. If you can link those two pieces of information together, then you can be rest assured that you're paying rent to the representative of the owner, and the owner is actually the person that owns the property. But without that, you're going on good faith. And we can still operate on good faith in a lot of things, but if you want to be sure, if you've been a victim of fraud or scams, that's definitely 2 steps you can take.
Yeah, that would be a pretty savvy renter, I would think. Who knows? Maybe we'll have, like on the social media platforms, maybe we'll have blue checks for the landlords. Like, I am the official landlord, verified.
Just
Well,
wait till you
Zillow
start
does
renting
that.
to an attorney, and then you'll find out who the savvy renter is.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, fair enough.
And Zillow offers that service. They offer verified landlords
Oh,
for
they
people
do.
who have substantial amount of experience leasing properties. So again, another great reason to get with a good property manager. The tenants who are renting your homes will never really have to be unassured or fearful that they're renting from a scam artist. So that
Well,
matters.
there is security in that, right? Knowing for the tenant to
There
know
is.
that they're leasing with a professional property management company, because now they know, there's some accountability here. If my toilet breaks, I have beyond reasonable doubt to know that they will send a maintenance guy, compared to Joe Schmo. You rent from him and he may get around to it after he gets off work at 5 p.m. Right?
Yeah.
So, no, good thoughts, guys. Well, yeah, thank you so much. I've personally found a lot of value in this, so I'm sure the listeners will as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yep. Sounds
Thank
good.
you, Donnie.
Yep,
Look forward to our next nuts and bolts episode next week.
let's do it.
Hey there, it's Peter Murphy with Buying Tampa Bay. Are you an investor who has ever wanted to own real estate in Tampa Bay? Or do you currently have real estate and want to grow your portfolio, add a few new investment properties? Or maybe you just need some awesome property management to de-stress your life? Well, here's what I found. HomeProp is hands down the best real estate investment brokerage in Tampa Bay. And they can help you build wealth in real estate, which is right in line with our podcast mission to build wealth in real estate. And not just wealth as in dollars and cents, but in the quality of your life, the quality of your community, and just enriching what exists around you. So you want to learn more? Click on the link to HomeProp in the podcast description and give them a shot.